Well, Jake, appreciate you coming. So Jake is the founder of Railway. You guys use Railway? You guys know what it is? All right. Who uses Railway?
Nice.
All right.
Okay, pretty good.
Didn't raise their hand here? All right, we got a few. We're gonna convince you guys by the end. So.
Nice.
Appreciate you coming out. I think one of the things in the different programs we do here, we love to get founders that are in the space now, that have built something that people enjoy and use, and that have scaled to come out, tell some of their stories. You all are kind of in that same journey, building something, getting it to scale, getting it to grow. We'll try to touch on some things from Jake's experience and from building Railway, on hopefully things that you can kind of learn from or have some entertainment from as a kind of founder story. And then we'll leave some kind of time at the end for some questions. But before we get going, you want to just give some background on yourself and kind of how you got started with Railway?
Yeah. So I'm from Canada originally, and worked at a few different companies, and then at some point realized that I wanted to build something in infrastructure, and that infrastructure had to be like way, way easier because I was not going to spend my life stitching together Terraform files. And so, that's kind of the impetus for it. Messed around a little bit to try and figure out what to go in and do, but just kind of kept coming back to this, and then, added more stuff to it, and it just naturally is kind of progressed. So that's the TLDR of the story.
Yeah, I mean, touching Terraform files is a good inspiration to go figure out how to make it better. I think if you've been there, it's tedious. You kind of get it going. You get excited the first time, then you got to make a change. And it's like, fuck, I gotta go.
Well, it just grows over time, right? It's like this living, breathing thing, and especially as tools get a lot faster to grow, that context, continually loading it into your brain and then unloading it and all those other things, right? It's always disjoint from the actual thing you're doing, because you're like, okay, now I have to switch to infrastructure, right? So wanted to pull a lot of that together and make it really, really trivial, so that the context for yourself, and which ultimately is funny, it benefits deeply for the agents, it's easier for you to kind of digest roughly.
That makes sense. And so you had this kind of moment hey, this is a problem, let me go solve it. It was probably first let me solve it for myself. But at some point you're like, wait a minute, I think this is actually a pretty valuable company. What was that spark, and what'd you do right after that?
So I left Uber basically, and I was like, I'm going to start something, I think, wanted to do it, figured it was kind of the right time. And I just started building stuff, a couple things in crypto, a couple things in random places. And I always needed a database, and it was annoying to go and get a database. And so I just added Postgres to this shitty VM that I could curl and get, an instance, right? And at the start, it was literally just a user in a Postgres database. And I was like, all right, well, it's fine. I don't need anything crazy. And then I was using it, and then I was like, oh, okay, I need a Redis instance. So I'm like, I'm going to add Redis, right? And then I was adding stuff to this over time. And I was working with a few friends, and they're like, oh shit, this is actually really cool in general. Can I have access to this? And I was like, not really, because you'll just delete all of my data. But okay, let's go and chat with some people and figure out, is this interesting or not. So I actually just posted on Twitter and was like, I'm working on something interesting. Who should I talk to or whatever? And then it just kind of exploded from there. Random people were like, are you raising money? And I was like, what? No, I'm trying to build this thing. And I just ended up talking with a bunch of different people, and I was like, are you all building this? I went to the CTO of GitHub at the time and a few other places, because I just wanted to build this thing, right? I didn't even really want to take it anywhere crazy. I was like, I'm gonna start something and build that and see where it goes. Anyways, I chatted with a bunch of people, and at the end I was I had no job offers, but I had a bunch of angel checks, and I was like, all right, cool. Well, I guess I'll just go with it, right? And a lot of this is just well, fuck it, in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's keep going, and you can always go back. Basically, is I think a reasonably solid piece of advice. Take some amount of risk, and if it doesn't work out, you can always go back.
No, I mean, I think that chasing the damn, this is cool, do I have access to it? That's a good feeling. So if you're building something early on, you're really hunting for that. And a lot of people would tell you it's cool, but they're no, let me give it to me now kind of feeling,
your first user, your first 100. I think your goal as a founder initially should be to get your first 100 users. Try and get people to use something. It can be a family friend. It can be whatever. So long as you get a bit of running water almost over that thing, you're gonna get feedback. Originally, our help was literally just, it was a link to a Discord channel, and I just had Discord open on my side screen, and it was user has joined the channel, and it was hey, how's it going, why are you here, basically. And I would just help these people, and then that's kind of how it just kept rolling.
Love that. And so had a little inspiration. Friends are like, how do I get access to this? You go try to get a job somewhere else to do this. Get a bunch of angel checks. Okay, cool. Now
Yep.
you got your own job.
Yep.
You fast forward many years now, and you guys, I think I saw a tweet from you just like this past week, like numbers so big I can't even screenshot it fast enough.
Yeah.
And it's just probably been ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, how does it feel kind of on this end? And we'll probably dial into the different parts of the journey. But curious, now you look back at it, like, did you think it was gonna get this big? Did you think it was gonna grow this fast? Like, what was the kind of, when did that kind of like click for you?
I guess like yes and no. I was like, oh, I think it'll be big at some point, but I think big is always like an aperture at the point in time, and you're like, oh, this feels really, really big, and then you go and look back, and you're like, holy shit, that was really small, right? Like, so it's really just about that, honestly, like. Where are we right now? What do we need to do to get that next phase, and then kind of moving directly towards it, right? So
When you look back at the journey, what it's I think easier to kind of look at milestones reverse, right? So when I look back at the history, so you start, you probably have a small crew with you. Maybe at the start, maybe it's just you.
yeah, it was like just me, and then like a month or two later, there's a friend from college I like recruited, and I was like, hey, do you want to like work on this thing? I think they just left their job in general, so we were just hacking on it, and then trying to like pull in more people roughly, and be like, oh, we got to build all this stuff, So
And then what was the first kind of like for you, the milestone of like, I think we have something critical for other people. You're building a dev tool, right? So dev
Yeah.
tools, critical, I think is an important word. What was that moment of like, damn, like if this is down, like people will yell at me and this is a problem. When did you first feel that?
I think I don't know if I even have a moment. It just like it gets more important, if that makes sense. It's like a one big kind of continuum of like, oh shit, more people are using this thing, and it's really, really important, right? At some point, we had to build like support to make sure that we were getting back to users in any reasonable frequency of time. I guess maybe the moment would probably be like we had to move off Discord for support, right? Because we were just like, oh, we can't even track any of these like requests that we have roughly, and we want to get back to those users, right? So yeah.
That makes sense. And then Railway, one thing I've always loved about it, I like opinionated products. I like products that, when it's a tool, it's like how you would have built the tool for yourself and you have a certain perspective. Like what made you want to build it in a particular way? Like I think a lot of other cloud platforms were do anything, do everything, do it however you want. Terraform is the most version of that, right? But you were like, no, this is actually a good way to do it. Probably for this segment of people, but like what made you lean into that? And then how have you maintained that over the course of time? Because I'm sure you get every feature request in the world, but how do you guys keep that going?
Well, I think first of all, it does actually help to think about your competitors over time. In my mind, it's like what can you do that is like markedly better than them, roughly, right? And if you look at like an AWS or GCP or anything else like that, you open the dashboard and you're like, oh my god, there's all this stuff. Like, what do I even do here, right? And so for us, the value prop was like, well, we have to keep it simple. Like we have to keep it trivial, but we also have to like make sure that it's powerful. So that was like always a thing for us of if we give you really, really solid structured primitives and we make like really, really great kind of like volumes that you can use anywhere, right? That like are adaptive to the way that you're scaling, then you don't necessarily even need to manage a lot of these things. And so deciding kind of that through line of like, what does it look like up front kind of helps you make those design decisions to say this is in the vision or this is like out. Like I don't know if this is in the vision. I think a good product principle as a side note is like say no a lot. Just like wait until users are really, really begging you for that feature. Maybe not initially, maybe build whatever the thing is that gets you your first 100 users. But once you have something that is almost like malleable or like tacit, like start being very deliberate about those things and trying to figure out how you can get 100 activated users, like users that are coming back, right? Because if people like the product, they'll use it and then they'll disappear, right? But if people love the product, they'll pull it into their workflows and they'll use it a lot. And the compounding over time is just it's crazy, especially with a lot of the agentic stuff that's like not on an exponential, but it's like on a super exponential right now, right? And so I think being able to go and build like that allows you to say no to a lot of things initially via your taste, and then after a while it's just like we just can't do that. Like we just don't have enough cycles to like even do that,
I mean, when you're starting and it's you in a small group, everyone kind of listens to you, you're the founder. As you build a team, this kind of grows beyond it. And so this philosophy of like actually say no a lot, like be kind of lean with what we want to kind of do, keep it simple yet powerful. What kind of org stuff have you learned? I'm sure this is trial and error and definitely not everything has worked probably as expected, but what have you kind of like, synthesized over time of like, hey, I bring in these kinds of people and I give them this kind of direction so that we can maintain these things, knowing that you can't be in every corner of the company now?
Yeah. So as a side note, we're like remote fully. And so we're very, very aggressive on the like agency autonomy. Like we're not going to be around. Like we'll hire people like in Thailand or something. And it's like, well, I don't have enough waking hours to be online that period of time. So there's almost a good forcing function in terms of you have to kind of roughly be autonomous. And I think that that's something you should definitely look for in any early hires is if you feel like you have to manage the crap out of this person, imagine managing 10 or 100 of these people, right? And because the people that you end up hiring, like you are going to get 10 or 100 more of those individuals, right? And so if those people are not aligned with your vision or like not understanding it, or you have to consistently come back to them, that might be a hard decision that you have to make in terms of like, hey, it's not, we're not jiving here, right? And it's no fault of your own or anybody else. Like not every person, not every startup, not every point in time,
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Kind of back to the early days for you. So when you guys started, I remember, DevOps was kind of like leaving the fanfare of being something that people wanted to invest in. There was kind of this philosophy of like, well, you got the big clouds, it's all kind of done. The consensus window has kind of like left. Yet somehow you guys, first didn't waver against that. You guys kept going. And second, you found a way and a pathway through it. There's only a few companies I think that make it like that. One, like how was it navigating that early days where you're probably running into more people that are skeptical about your business and how you can grow and how you could fight the giants? You had belief. So what was that early kind of moment like for you guys?
I think you have to have like a deep conviction in the thing you're building. I think a lot of people go out and they're like, oh, I want to start a company or like do something, right? And you almost kind of want to avoid a little bit of that, like do the exploratory phase, but like wait until an idea really, really pulls you, right? Because there's going to be plenty of those times. There's going to be times when you like, we've pitched like hundreds of investors, right? And like hundreds of investors have told us like no. And like that is roughly demoralizing. But if you care about the thing that you're building so much and you're like, listen, I actually genuinely believe that all of you are wrong. We're going to go ahead and build this. It's going to be deeply excellent. Then you kind of have that conviction to go and build through those things. But I think if you're kind of like, oh, I want to start this, and then, the times get really, really tough, like push, like the best times at the company have always been after we pushed through a period where it just sucked ass. Like it was horrible, right? And I think you need that deep conviction to get to those like next milestones. Genuinely because the journey is so long and there's various different things that are going to be like ups and deep downs,
And then, like now, so, early on, maybe you're going against the grain of the trend of the investor market. You still go raise. Now, as that shifts and your company kind of shows a lot more evidence, you actually have your pick a little bit more as you go down. And you guys have been able to raise a good amount of money. How's your philosophy now of like picking investors? Who do you want to partner with? Like, as you've now worked with different kinds of folks or talked with people, has that opinion changed? Early on, you might need any money, but now you could be a little bit more selective about like who to bring on and maybe even be cheaper on the price or whatever. But like curious, like if your philosophy has changed as you guys have now on the success side of the puzzle,
Yeah. I don't think my philosophy has changed. I was just like, almost like lucked into it by accident, and it was just like, oh, hey, like these angels seem really great. Okay, maybe we'll like take money and work with them or whatever. And then, a few of them have ultimately been like so beyond deeply helpful and deeply generous. And then, our first institutional investor, they were like, yeah, you seem to know what you're doing. We're just going to leave you alone. Like you can let us know if you like need something or whatever. And I was like, all right, cool. That sounds great. Second institutional investor, I was actually more deliberate on this one. I was like, I have no idea how to run a business. Like I am an engineer. You hand me a spreadsheet and I would just like, my brain will shut down. So I was like, we need somebody who's going to teach us how to be like deeply operational, right? So one of our board members, Erica from Redpoint, she's wonderful, deeply operational, right? And so I think the way that we pick investors is almost like, how do you exchange some part of your company, which will ultimately become, if it's deeply successful, the cheapest option call on that company at that point in time for an unfair advantage? And I think that this is something that people don't 100% like think about when they're kind of like rolling through fundraising. They're just like, how do I get the hottest partner or like the biggest valuation or all of this other stuff, right? And I don't know if that's 100% correct, but it's definitely not the way that we think about it, right? Like I look for people who actually care a lot about the space. Like, are they going to show up and have really, really good advice? Are they going to think about these things? Can they help us in something that like functionally, like no idea, right? And so like, you know, Erica on the operations side, and then this new investor we've got on like enterprise sales, right? Because those are kind of opportunities for us to go and almost like exchange that equity for the almost like expertise.
So it's exchanging the equity for an unfair advantage, right?
Yeah,
So
100%.
And I think startups are about leverage. Obviously, when you're starting, you don't have more money than your competition, right? So if you're building something and AWS is your competitor, GCP, you can't outbid them. You can't expend them. So you got to find some other creative function, and you kind of leaned on that.
Yeah, 100%. Right. It's like, I mean, if anybody's ever watched the movie like Moneyball, it's like, it's a lot of that early where you're just like, listen, like this, like, I think individual is going to have outside impact in here. There might be like a quirk where they're like a little bit kind of like whatever, right? But you kind of work with those individuals and you kind of turn those like quirks into almost like superpowers, right? So I think you just have to be very, very deliberate and also quite savvy in terms of your initial expectations, because it is like a lot of almost arbitrage.
Yeah, love it. Also love that Moneyball movie. I was a diehard Ace fan, so I'm one of the guys in the bleachers in that movie.
Yeah,
so, like,
100%.
It's a good time. So you guys have exploded. I mean, the agentic world is probably a big part of that. You talked about being a kind of simple, fitting in the human context as a product, probably give you an unfair advantage into the agentic context, same problem space.
Yep.
As this is growing, like, you're now seeing probably all kinds of stuff happening. What's your worldview, both with your company and kind of the external side? Like, what's happening here? I mean, we all see what's going on in the world, but you have a unique perspective here. So I'm curious what you're seeing, what you're excited about, what you're not excited about.
I think it's such an interesting, the exponential curve is no longer an exponential curve. It's now a super exponential curve. And humans are very, very, very bad at understanding exponentials. And so they have no basis to understand what a super exponential is, right? So one thing that we're seeing right now is it's almost like if Claude or Chat can't see you, your product is not going to hit any of these curves, right? Because those agents are doing thousands of actions per second, because they're getting better at being long running and you can pipe them into those workflows. If you can hook into that, then your flywheel turns over a lot better. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult for those kind of almost like curves to really, really play out. So I sort of understand the investor thesis of like, if your chart looks like this, great, awesome, set your price or whatever. But if your chart doesn't look like that, then we'll wait until there's more information, even if it's deeply more expensive later.
Yeah, I mean, I think over time, a little bit older than most of the folks here, but like seeing kind of cloud happen, seeing the internet form, it gave a lot of leverage to startups where you could start kind of cheap and quick, but then the scale could grow. I think now we have not only agents that have good context and can run long, but we have this like hyper-connected social networks where like, you guys have probably noticed this project that has now changed names 3 times over the last 5 days, right? So you had Claudebot, Moltbot.
Yep.
It probably changed right now as well. Who knows what it's called? I think OpenClaw was right before this talk, but who knows what it's called now? But like, the hyper-connected nature of the networks has created this like, super exponential opportunity. And, you guys are kind of at the center of that. And so, when you see this as a founder, like you're like, hey, I'm in a unique position. These agents can see my product. They can leverage my product. You guys are probably unlocking more ways for agents to use it. But then how are you like are you changing your company operations as well? Like these agents are probably useful inside the company. So I'm curious how you're using agents yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm using a lot of like Claude Code either to author code or build almost like processes or workflows internally. And so the way that the company roughly works right now is we've built our own support tooling, which gives us all the telemetry from any users who have issues in general. That goes and gets piped into now basically just a version of Claude that has all of that context with all those MCPs. And then if you want to build a feature, you can essentially start working with Claude in terms of like moving that into shape. And then we have a tool internally to build almost a document that other people can go to review and say like, oh, is this like, does this actually make sense? And then you can kind of work alongside it. So that's like one way that we're kind of like building with those. And then internally, I've basically just said that I think if you are writing code by hand, you are making a deep, deep mistake. And like I've been writing code for probably 15, 20 years now. And it's gone and it's like probably not coming back. And so I think that you should really, really kind of leverage these agents to move deeply, deeply quickly, so that you can actually even think about things at a higher level. Like think about your architecture, think about your product, think about all of this other stuff, right? The implementation doesn't really matter anymore so long as you're not just like massively creating an absurd amount of tech debt, you know?
Yeah, don't just YOLO anything, but like, I think it's a huge opportunity. One thing I love to do is like there's a bunch of ideas on how the product should work, and sometimes you go and convince other people in your team. It's probably the easiest moment in time to like whip up an iteration. And by the way, half the times you whip it up with the agent, you hate it yourself, so you never tell anybody you did it.
Yep.
So, you can quickly get out of that habit of like convince other people of a feature. Just try it. Much easier to do that.
Yep.
So support, was that, outside of the product engineering world, is that kind of like the number one problem area that you guys had? I mean, because you pointed agents as it sounds like that was like a big need.
Yeah. I mean, so we have 2 million users now, and we're adding about 250,000 users a month. And so it's growing reasonably quickly. And each of those users has friction points, pain points, et cetera. And we're like a really small team. We're like 35 people. And so we have about probably six people in like running support roughly. So we have like 4 support engineers now, and then 2 customer success engineers. And yeah, we had to build a lot of this leverage and tooling initially because we only had 1 support engineer, and then we had 2 support engineers, right? And yeah, it's just there's a lot more volume now, especially with a bunch of the agentic stuff. That's kind of a massive point, because we want the, like, we don't want to just basically be like, oh, here's Claude, like Claude will solve most of your things, because 1, I think that's a poor experience, and 2, we actually want all the signal from that in terms of if you're asking us about why custom domains suck to set up, like we can probably make that experience better, and so we want to know all of that information too,
Yeah, I mean, if you just point Claude at it, everyone else can do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
If you craft an experience with Claude, then you can, again, get more exponential value out of the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. So that was one initially where we were like, we're gonna go in on this, and then I think to the earlier point of like think about what your competitors are not good at, like support's pretty up there with AWS and other platforms. So
yeah, I mean, just you can't get past the console. Where's the support button?
Yeah, right. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very interesting time. So 2 million users. You said 250,000 per month. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's nutty. There's a lot of stuff that's bending and stuff. So
I think a lot of the things that we talk about here with the early founders are like growth, distribution. We're all technical. Many of us here, we're builders. So like we know we can build stuff, but how do you grow it? In the early days, what did you use to get off the ground? I think you talked a little bit about Twitter, but like, was there something specific that you did? And now that you're seeing this crazy growth trajectory, you're like, are you doing something different now to kind of enhance that?
Yeah. So initially, like, we just basically I found an entry point in a vertical, which was I'm going to post on Twitter and I'm going to show up here, and if anybody has any issues or anything else like that, I can respond there. And then I'm just going to do my distribution through that one channel, because I had like a Twitter account for shit posting, basically. And I was like, all right, well, like we'll build that as a channel. And then once that flywheel really started to go, then we got to the point where there was actually like positive yield on like word of mouth. And then I think that's when you kind of know like you have something, is like if you get positive K factor, so like friends will tell friends basically, then you can know that like, oh, that's working, right? And so the initial channel that I wanted to get off the ground was that word of mouth, and just figuring out how we could get to the almost like iteration of the product initially. And then once you have that flywheel initially, you can figure out if there's other channels you want to go and crack, right? And so now we're posting on like LinkedIn and stuff like that, which is like not a channel that I'm like, okay, cool, we want to do that. But like we have like enterprise people that are like, oh, we want you to show up and like appear in the places in which we go in and appear, right? So I think you should pick a channel, try and figure out how you can get it to almost like self-sustaining, so to speak, where it's like very, very low energy, and then try and figure out what your other channels might be, right? Like you can do maybe agentic SEO for growth later, you can do regular SEO, you can do all those other things. But every time you try and boot a new channel, it's essentially energy that you could take away from an existing compounding channel. So you have to believe that there is a good thesis there, right? Like any amount of energy we could take to go in and craft things on LinkedIn could be used for agentic SEO, or it could be used for all this other stuff. And thankfully, a bunch of that feeds into there, right? But it all depends on your goals, right? And so, if you're building a consumer app and you're just starting out, you might not want to just like build your brand on LinkedIn or anything, right? But if you happen to already have one and it's kind of in line with your product, then I think you can find a really, really solid entry point. So I'd figure out what is aligned with yourself, your business, et cetera. And then especially early, like don't do anything you wouldn't really want to go in and do. There's a kind of, I'll butcher the quote, but there's like an adage that it's like, it's really difficult to like compete with somebody who's having fun. And so if you just start from like a slog fest of like, okay, I'm going to, I hate LinkedIn, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to post on LinkedIn every single day, right? Like that's a pretty hard flywheel to keep like turning over, right? Versus if you're like, oh, cool, like I do this thing by default because I like it. I'm just going to keep going and doing it and figure out how I can incorporate in it. Then you can start your flywheels in a really, really solid way.
Yeah, make work feel like play, and you can do it every day, and it's hard to compete with that. I think one of the things as a founder, when you look back at it, we develop a lot of battle scars, right? You learn a lot of stuff. You don't even know when you're learning it. Later, you realize, oh, I was doing that. I'm such an idiot. If you kind of go back and look at your journey here at Railway and maybe other things that you've built, what are like a few things that you would pick up and say, like, you're speaking to an audience of founders that are kind of at the start of that journey, like, not advice, but just like, hey, I went through some of these, like anything, come to mind on that front?
I'm trying to figure out which ones are good pieces of advice.
Just throw them out,
Well, I mean, like, I wouldn't try. Okay, so in the early days, I would spend a lot of time or energy trying to like debate things, and I was like, I don't think that's a good idea or anything else like that, right? And I've mostly switched my thesis now, where I'm like, that's dumb. How do we do that immediately so that we get some answer out of it, right? Because sometimes I'm even wrong, and we're like, oh shit, that like actually worked really well, right? But it kind of removes any of that energy of having to like go in and waste it on like words versus like action, right? And so I think action is one of the best things you can take, because either you get like sweet success or bitter failure, and both of those things actually will ultimately form some basis for experience, something you can pull on, something you can learn on, right? But if you spend that time debating, you don't actually get anything out of it, So I would say the action, and then just do the things that roughly feel right to you.
That makes sense. I love that expression. It just helps you get your kind of answer super quick. What's your, last one here for you, and then we'll kind of open it up to some questions from the folks here. But like, Railway is growing fast. You told us some of the numbers. You're starting to become, I would say, the premier platform for startups and agents and enterprise now to kind of use.
Yep.
Like, where do you want to take this to? What's the, what's the, I don't want to say what's the top end goal, but like, if we look at the next milestone now, like, is it, I want, like, what do you want out of this?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer that like every single person has like a thing that they should be working on. It like for lack of better words, it sounds cringe, but like purpose. Like there's a thing that you should be doing at this specific time, right? And I think the thing that we are doing and that we should be doing at this specific time is making it easier for people to create things, like good things, And so for us, that's what we think about a lot, right? How do we make it just trivially easy for you to just unburden yourself of any amount of software that you have to go in and produce and start pushing your creative endeavors into the world, right? And we're starting to do that on the software side, right? But in an ideal sense, like we should be able to go in and do it in the physical like world or anything else like that. Like we've started getting to a point where we run our own data centers. And so we've built this system we've virtualized all the racks. And so you can now actually start like dragging and dropping like servers into these racks, and it will start cutting like POs for like server hardware, right? So you can get to a point and be like, I have this much power, I have this much Ethernet, I have this much whatever. How do we go in and kind of like push that into the world, right? And so I think that making it easy for people to create anything is what we want to go in and do. And I think that, in terms of like a financial outcome or an impact outcome, like I think the score almost takes care of itself in that sense of like, if you build that, it's so deeply valuable to people, and it's also such a force for good that like sky's the limit in terms of what we can do.
Makes a ton of sense. Appreciate you sharing part of your story here, and kind of sharing some of your wisdom. And let's get to some questions. I think, do you want to just stand up here, or do you want to pull aside, Aiden?
So something I wanted to kind of understand was, you mentioned that some of your best times were after like a string of shitty times, right? Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on what those shitty times looked like, and how did you actually get out of it? Because I think as founders, we spend more shitty times than the good ones. So curious to hear that.
I think that's always, it's like very, very hard to like know in general. I think if you end up in what I would call like these loops, essentially, where you're doing a lot of the same thing over and over again, like I'm a big believer in the thing, which is like a lesson is taught to you exactly however many times is required to learn that lesson. And so if you are kind of repeating those things and you're noticing any of those like patterns or repetitions or anything else like that, try to figure out how you can switch it up, right? Like, and just add a little bit of kind of like almost like jitter to the system. And I think you'll figure out pretty quickly of like, oh, cool, I have to like manage the crap out of this person and like we're not aligned or whatever. So what happens if I let go a little bit? Like, do those things get better? Do they get worse, right? Ultimately, they change a little bit. So I'd figure out how to inject a little bit of change into the system so that you can go in and do that. And with the asterisk being, there are potentially periods of time where you may even know that it's gonna suck. Like, there's just like, and if you have a very, very clear thesis and goal, I think you can rally people around you and say like, listen, it's actually gonna suck for the next like 6 months. Right. But after that, I think if we nail these things, you're going to start seeing this stuff. Right. And I think if you can make that clear to the people that you're working with, they'll back you. Right. Like they've backed me in general because they can see that. Right. I don't think people just want these things to be like rosy all the time. Like people actually, maybe a hot take, like people actually like working hard and they like working on something that they feel they can move forward. Right. So I would say probably try and just like switch it up in general, but hard times are like very unavoidable. So
Got it. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks. Hello.
Thanks for coming. I use Railway every day.
Oh, thank you.
So my question is, I'm building an infra product. It's useful when my customers are in somewhat of a scale. So my question to you from your early days, how do you validate things quickly and move fast when everything you do should work well and should work well all the time because your reliability is number one for your customers?
So I guess I would almost try and judo the question a little bit, which is, okay, so assume that we run a bunch of production infrastructure because we do, and it has to be reliable because people depend on it, right? There's actually a deep continuum of what constitutes like production useful infrastructure, right? Like internal tools, as an example, like could be a good avenue, right? You can start kind of there and say, hey, listen, this doesn't have to be 100% reliable if the value is so high. Right. And I think that almost helps you kind of almost zero in on a spot where you can say, hey, the value is actually so good that if it doesn't have to be 100% reliable and this smaller section can like work, then I can know and have a proof point to build towards those reliable systems. I think the problem of saying, oh, it has to be 100% reliable on all these other things is you're going to spend a lot of time building this thing. And then you might be like wrong about some stuff. Right. And you might have to go in and twist it. Right. And I think especially with like software architecture, like there were services that held together for like thousands of requests per second with like one shitty Redis instance. And I think you can get a lot out of those things if you're deliberate about the insertion points of how people will go in and use them, right? So yeah.
I would basically double down on what he was saying earlier is like you're better off just getting an answer faster. So, if your goal is to help somebody with a lot of scale and take a long time to get this for the end use case you're trying to get to, if you find an internal tool use case or something else that's, again, very critical and has a lot of scale, but yeah, if it's down for a few minutes a day or an hour, like it's not the end of the world. It's not like their main website's down. It allows you to get your answer faster of do they even want it? Do they even need it? Does your solution kind of help? And so you're better off picking this corner. You don't have to say like, I'm only in this corner forever, but it allows you to get going and validate that. And then you basically have to buy the future time from yourself. Like you need to earn that kind of time, right? And so like, oh, it's gonna take me a year to make it perfect. Well, how do we earn the year? We got to go prove something. And so finding another pocket there is pretty useful.
Yeah. And people will tolerate a lot of that, right? Like, I mean, look at the like CloudBot stuff. Like it breaks in various different ways where you're just like, no, like you can't be possibly using this for like 100% reliable like use cases, right? But people are like, I want a virtual assistant. I want this thing. And they have this like desire to like go towards that thing so much that it doesn't matter actually like the quality or the craft or all of those other things if there's a deep enough utility, right? Like those things can also come later, right? And I do argue that they matter, especially when you get into a lot of these kind of like larger arenas where there's many people and products. Like brand matters a lot and quality matters a lot and a lot of those things, but they don't matter initially when you're starting the thing. You just have to find that initial wedge where people give enough of a crap to be like, I want that thing and I will keep using it, and I'll give you feedback so that you can go and iterate, and that starts the flywheels.
Okay, so getting a Redis with an API call, even if it's down, is a sign.
Yeah. And like people will just be like, hey, listen, this thing is down, right? Like if they're telling you it's down, like that's good. They want to use it, right?
Okay.
Yeah, the worst thing is if you're down and nobody
And
tells you.
nobody sends you a message.
You don't
right?
want that.
Which I mean we've had that some of the early days where we're like, oh shit, like everything's down. We're probably not building the right thing there.
Yeah, I built plenty of stuff where oh, this was down for 2 hours. Nobody yelled at me. Well, that nobody wants it.
Yeah,
so.
right. So to your earlier question, like how do you know? It's like people start yelling at you. Like they just like are very angry. And that's how you know that you've actually built a really good product because like they're pissed because like they are relying on it deeply. And they're like, oh my God, this should work. And you're like, oh, I know it should work. But this part sucks. We'll fix it.
Okay. I'll hope for that.
I'm Kaylin. I'm building company memory for Teams, and I'm a solo founder right now. And in the early stages, you have limited resources, and I have my first 100 users, and it's really hard to know what the right next decision is when the resources are limited. So when there's people asking for feature requests or fixing bugs, you need to also keep track of the competitors. How do you know what the right decision is when there's limited resources?
I think I would argue that you probably don't need to keep track of the competitors initially. You can look at them and say, does this fit my vision of what this thing should be? And I think that it's funny. I've listened to some other founders and they were talking about oh yeah, my job is to set vision or whatever. And as I was growing up, I was that's kind of a bullshit job. Can't you just know or whatever, right? Don't people just know? But over time, actually, I've realized that it is actually very important and you should be very, very clear about what your vision is because it will help you make these decisions and it will help you decide what parts you should bring into your product. It will help you communicate to the people that you're going to go and ultimately recruit and be hey, listen, this is what we want to go in and build. And so I think when there's a lot of that kind of noise, I always try and kind of gravitate a little bit more towards peace a bit. So I journal a lot, right? Every Sunday I journal. I think I try and slow things down and I try and figure out what are the things that are kind of roughly emerging that we need to be working on this specific week. And then I figure out what we need to do that specific week to move those things forward, right? And kind of refine on that vision. So I think that that's kind of what I would roughly recommend. And I think a lot of that intuition actually comes from making good and bad decisions, right? And so if you make a bad decision, you build something that actually people don't want, it gives you a lot of information about people really like that and then they didn't like that other thing, right? And so almost keeping that iteration loop kind of rolling, I would say is a big one.
Yeah, I love the phrase, something's going to slow down and speed up. You just have to take a lot of it and condense it down into something that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I love the weekly framing, right? We talk a lot about A+ problems here every week, and there's usually one thing that matters and most things don't.
Yeah, right. And when there's so much noise and so much bandwidth and so much all these other things, it can be really, really difficult to go in and do that. But that's where I would argue the arbitrage is right now, right? Everybody is trying to move towards whatever that specific thing is of the week. And if you can kind of almost try and make those contrarian bets and be this is the thing I genuinely believe that we should be building, way, way better for you if there's actually people not building that thing, right? Because then you're a kind of unique, thing in that market that people can be okay, actually, I really want that at a specific point, right? And it might take a long while of pawing in the darkness or crawling around this void or whatever, right? But if your intuition is good and you want to build this thing specifically, I believe that at some point you'll kind of go and hit that, right? But that's also why I would recommend trying to get those first 100 users as quickly as possible because that period sucks.
100%. And I think the last thing I would add is you're going to be resource constrained for a long time. As a startup,
probably ever.
Yeah, for example, he's going after AWS and GCP. He's resource constrained no matter how much money he has, right? But so I don't think resource constraint is a problem. It actually helps you because you can't do all the other BS. You can only do one or two things. And so you're better off deciding doing it. If it's the wrong thing, just take a step back and go do the right thing. And, I would use the constraint as an advantage.
Yeah, and it's that kind of earlier thing of if things are repeating themselves, if you're doing this stuff and it's not working or what not working, it's some part of that action loop is not working to move you towards something, right? And it could move you, you could use it to move yourself towards something bad or something good, but at a certain point, it's actually better if you're not getting any information to get negative signal than it is to get no more information,
100%.
Hey, I'm Shreyans.
Hello.
So I'm building an agent that performs actions on your user's behalf instead of just telling them how to do something.
Okay.
So it's a product for developers. So the developer integrates it into their app. So like Railway at the core is like a developer experience company, right? And so it's similar for me too. Like if it's easy for developers to add it, that's when they'll add it. Where do you think developer experience as a whole category of companies is going with agents doing more and more of the development?
Okay, so for agents, and I think this goes back to the bandwidth thing earlier. I think developer experience is about taking advantage of the human context window. And so now that the agents are so good and that I expect them to be so much better, these agents are making thousands of decisions in the time period that you can make one, right? And so I think that experience is two things. It is, can the agent see it and can they action on it and get the information that they need to close their iteration loops? And can you get the information as a developer that you need to kind of go and make the informed decision about how to go and orchestrate these agents, right? And so good experience is actually good observability in my mind, where you can just see and understand what is the agent doing, et cetera, right? Like, and if you think about a lot of the experiences that are either agentic or not even agentic, like, one of the recent things they released, and I guess it's not recent anymore, but like you can see the agent thinking, right? You can see that and you can introspect it and be like, is it on the right track, right? And that's part of the experience, right? Like, I'm a big fan of Don Norman, like the design of everyday things, visibility, feedback, and mapping. And I think that having those experiences is really, really solid for humans. And now we're just kind of in an era where the agent experience matters as well, but you still have to bring the human along for the ride, you know?
So like a lot of developer experience traditionally was about, how many steps, like what's the lowest number of steps you could have to getting someone started?
Yep.
Do you think that is going away to some extent? Because as you said, like agents can do a significantly higher number of tasks to get something done.
I think the through line for me is always like time to aha. So like getting to that magic moment as quickly as possible. And so if the agent can autonomously navigate this thing in like 30 seconds, like that might be good enough for your time to aha, right? But if you have to kind of intervene all the time, or you have to like whatever and like nudge them, you're not going to get that, oh shit, this thing is done. Like that's crazy. Like, oh my God, what else can this do? Right? Experience. And that to me is always the crux of if you can give somebody more than they put in, you're winning on the experience, right? So if they put in a little and they get a lot, they'll want to go in and do it, right? And so that's kind of how I think about a lot of the experiences, whether they're agentic or whether they are kind of human in the loop or anything else like that.
Yeah, a lot of the LLMs are trained on human data.
Yeah,
And so
so
they mimic
everybody
how
becomes RL
we kind of
machines.
operate. And
Yeah.
once we saw the thinking show up, actually it revealed, wait a minute, it actually does perform like, when it started, it was like, oh, it's like a junior engineer thinking. Like they have some flaws, they have some good stuff, but you can kind of see it, you can kind of optimize for it.
Yep.
And, so now if you can build the experiences where an agent can read my docs and understand it better, that's huge,
Yeah, 100%. And it helps even like slow down time a little bit for yourself, because you can see it's like the agent is calling this MCP server, the agent is whatever, right? And then if you go and you read the bottom, it's like was working for like 3 minutes or something else like that. And if you just sat there and you had no information, like that's not a very good experience, right? And so almost like taking the human along for the ride and understanding that, so that you as a human who's interacting with this thing can say, oh shit, that's what it did. Okay, that makes total sense. That was what I was going to go in and do. And so we should go here next, right? But if you don't have any of that information, you're like, where am I? Like what are we doing?
I saw a cool trick. There's this engineer that was working on docs for a DevTool product, and they were like, hey, can you give me like keys for OpenAI, Anthropic? I'm like, okay, cool. What are you doing? And he's like, well, I made the docs. I just want to test like an agent with all of these LLMs. Like, how long does it take and does it succeed?
Yeah.
And then he ran it like hundreds of times to optimize itself. And he was like, look, I got it to the point where the agents, like 2 were failing and one was taking 10 minutes and 50 iterations. And now like within like, 1 or 2 shots, it kind of gets it. And,
Yeah.
you just use the same tools against itself.
Yeah, 100%, right? And you can also build content for the agents inside of your docs and figure out like hang points or anything else like that to just nudge them towards it, right? So there's a bunch of different avenues you can use to kind of make that experience like better.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Ishan. So I'm building a guidance system, and why I built it was because like AWS UI sucks, right? It's like UI built by engineers. So I was like, okay, I wish there was something that could just help me in AWS itself, because Amazon Q sucks. But the thing is, the amount of abstraction now is increasing, similar to Railway. Like now Claude can just execute scripts in the CLI. It can just execute scripts in the CLI itself. Like even Terraform and things, it's like a middle layer that you can kind of ignore now, because Claude can just in the CLI itself execute commands, right? So how fast are you seeing big companies adopting things like Railway and like moving further and further away from the like source itself?
I would say that this is kind of why figuring out what product and what entry point matters a lot, because what we do is, I think Railway would be a lot different story if we only hosted like stateless stuff, right? So if we only host web servers or anything else, they're kind of easy to like move around or whatever, right? But since we host databases and all those other things, there's almost an amount of like gravity. It's harder to kind of move a database. So I think if you pick a good entry point where people will start using that, and there's a good reason for somebody not to kind of almost like come into your turf, then I think those are good avenues in terms of selecting that. But I'm seeing a lot of these companies like move really, really quickly on these agentic experiences. So if you ultimately end up creating something that has deep value and is easy to replicate, then I would say that those are probably areas that you should try and figure out if you can get what VCs would call a moat, so that you can be more difficult to remove from that experience, and you can build kind of a compound like advantage.
So just small question: how fast are you seeing people move into like Vibe infra?
Yeah, really fast, like very, very fast. And it's. I was telling somebody that the world I went to asleep to in the winter is not the world I woke up to, because it's completely different. There was interest, and we had some amount of people like looking to go in and do this, and it feels like pretty much over like winter break, everybody discovered this kind of avenue, and now there's so many buyers at basically any price for any of these experiences that are going to solve these problems, because people end up being stuck on stuff that they need to get around, or they're going to get outshipped,
100%. Yeah. Well, appreciate the time today. This was awesome.
Appreciate you having me.
Give it up for Jake, everyone. Thank you.